Good morning, friends, and welcome to day 2 of a national conference on Indigenous capacity building and impact assessment. Once again, grateful for your time with us here today. As always, we want to begin by acknowledging the territories that we're gathered on here. So I raise my hands in respect to the respective territories that each of you are occupying coast to coast to coast today while participating in this session. To start us off, we have the Thundering Eagle drummers with us via video, and I'll turn it over to you, Angel, to introduce the drum group, please.
Thank you, Dan. Good morning, everyone. I am honored to be sharing this video performance of a group that are based actually, they're compromised. There's multiple drummers in the group, but the video only displays 2 because of the COVID restrictions and what have you that we had to navigate around to make this video possible. So there's only 2 people in it, but they're actually made up of a group of about 15 people, give or take, and they span from their roots come from Indigenous nations actually all across this country, which is why I thought they would be a nice, suitable drum group to reach out to. They're located here in Prince George, and so they've been together for a couple years now, and they love to share stories and performances and just share that really good energy with people. So we've got Kyle Sam, who is from Nakaslii-Watan, as the male drummer in the video, and we have Cheryl Lessert, who is from the Lake Babine Nation here out in Burns Lake, BC. So they're both based out of BC, but here in Prince George. So I hope you enjoyed this drumming song that we are about to share with you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much to the Thundering Eagle drummers for starting us off in such a good way. I'm going to do some introductory comments here prior to turning it over to Angel to introduce our first speaker. Yesterday, we started with some rules of engagement to create a safe, respectful container for our dialogue to occur. We asked that we encourage out-of-the-box thinking here, looking at old problems through new eyes. We ask that you listen generously to what's being shared with you and to offer a solution orientation. We know that we can always improve the work that we do on behalf of the people that we represent. So when you identify an improvement area, please be prepared to offer a solution. Problem identification, solution identification. We don't want to get stuck in the problem. We ask that you actively participate and be present during the session here today with us. The process is only as strong as the level of participation that we receive from each of you. We ask that you be hard on issues and soft on people, where we challenge ideas and not people. A great group of people, approximately 80 people from coast to coast to coast, are participating in this conference. So when we generate great ideas, as we always do when we come together, let's please take them as far as we can. And then lastly, when we have natural breaks during the course of the day, we just ask that you return from the breaks in a timely manner so that we can stay on time with our agenda. We also know that a good laugh heals a lot of hurts. So I want to start off with a few cartoons here and hope that they get us laughing a little bit. So here's the first, me sobbing my heart out, eyes swollen, nose red. I can't see you anymore. I'm not going to let you hurt me like this again. The trainer says, it was a sit-up, Dan. You did one sit-up. This is how I look breathing behind my mask. The guy from Forrest Gump. When you get your shower curtain from the dollar store.
I'm dying laughing over here.
You think you can hurt my feelings? I used to hold the flashlight for my dad. You can say anything to me and I'll handle it. And this is something that was interesting yesterday. I'm here live. I'm not a cat. I saw that in yesterday's session.
It was so funny.
I think I've watched it like 20 times over already. I love it.
And this is when you flush the toilet and the water starts rising. So our session here today, I just want to go back a little bit and talk about our session yesterday. At the core of what we are doing here is capacity building. Capacity building is fundamentally about improving effectiveness, our effectiveness at the micro and macro levels. Capacity building focuses us on furthering our ability to do new things and improve what we currently do. Most simply, capacity building improves our performance and enhances our ability to function and continue to stay relevant within a rapidly changing environment. Capacity building typically involves training, mentoring, and financial and or other resource support to individuals and organizations from external sources. And we know that capacity building does not happen overnight. It is a process that may take some time and often involves experts from many fields. Typically, capacity building will result in the adoption of new skills and knowledge, as well as systems to sustain and expand these improvements over time. So this conference that you're participating in is designed to allow the participants to learn and dream together through the sharing of experiences, information, tools, data, and systems. And I think we were reminded yesterday that a rising tide floats all boats. So when one of us improves, we all improve. Yesterday, we heard from our conference co-hosts, the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada and the First Nation Major Projects Coalition. The IAAC delivers high-quality impact assessments that contribute to informed decision-making on major projects in support of sustainable development. We heard from Patricia Brady, Vice President of External Relations and Strategic Policy, and Susan Winger, Director of Indigenous Policy, who spoke about the work that the impact assessment does. The agency does, provided a background in the Indigenous Capacity Support Program and the Participant Funding Program. The FN and MPC, the co-host of this event, is working to advance the capacity needs of our members in the broad areas of economic participation and environmental stewardship. The chair of the First Nations Major Projects Coalition, Chief Charlene Gale, provided her opening remarks, which were followed by Executive Director Nilo Edward and Director of Operations Angel Ransom, who provided an overview of the coalition and the work that we do. We heard from Sue Chiblo, who is the co-chair of the IAAC Indigenous Advisory Committee. The Indigenous Advisory Committee provides the Government of Canada expert advice and participates in the development of policy and guidance for the new impact assessment system. FNMPC's Angel Ransom is also a member of this advisory committee, and we'll be hearing from another member, Melody Lapine of Fort Chipewyan, later today. The Honorable Jonathan Wilkinson, the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, shared some welcoming remarks and thoughts for the future of impact assessment. So we had a pretty full day yesterday, and we have another full day here today. Please note, we're saying that it's going to be closing around 3:30. We might be able to close a little bit sooner today based upon our experience yesterday. So with those opening remarks, I want to turn it now over to Angel to introduce our first speaker. Angel.
Okay, great, thank you. I'm just waiting for the, there we go. Okay, hello again. I've got the honor of introducing Kim Jorgensen this afternoon for our people out in the East Coast. It's morning here in BC. So Kim, with over 15 years of experience in the environmental sector and over 10 years with the Matawa First Nations management, Kim applies her diverse skill set to a variety of projects at Four Rivers as their environmental services coordinator. Her role includes outreach and engagement surrounding environmental and impact assessments, environmental monitoring and research projects, environmental site investigations, and community-based cultural impact assessments. Kim holds an undergraduate degree in environmental science from the University of Manitoba and a Master of Science degree from Lakehead University with a focus in biology and aquatic botany. I'd like to welcome Kim's video presentation to begin now. Thank you. And we will do a question and answer period right after the video presentation is wrapped up. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to present today. My name is Kim Jorgensen, and I'm with Four Rivers, which is the Environment Department at Matawa First Nations Management. And I'm here today to talk to you about building community knowledge and capacity in impact assessments. So really what I'm here today is to share basically a decade of experience in engaging our Matawa member First Nation communities on impact assessments and environmental and lands and resource programming as a whole. My personal background is in environmental sciences. So I've been with Matawa for 10 years now, since the start of Four Rivers Group. So as I mentioned, we were established about 10 years ago as part of the Matawa First Nations Management Tribal Council, which is a group of 9 member First Nations in Northern Ontario. We have 4 road access communities and 5 remote access communities that are actually only accessible by winter road and air. So we provide environmental support services and programs to our 9 member First Nations, and we assist them to actively manage the lands and waters within their homelands. And we do that through providing a community initiative supports and capacity building at the community level. So we have a team of diverse backgrounds in environmental sciences, monitoring, geomatics, mining, communications. And the vision for our group, as it always has been, is to establish independent community lands and resource offices that are connected through regional network with common goals. So I just put a map up here for everybody so you can kind of see where we're situated in Canada and in Northern Ontario. And as I mentioned, we have 9 member First Nations. And when we're looking at kind of the permanent infrastructure developments in the area, you know, what's identified on this map is the red line there is the all-season highway, and you see some rail lines and really development around lands and resources. So for, you know, forestry or mining developments, they don't really extend beyond about halfway up the homelands. And the northern portion at this point is relatively underdeveloped. But that's all about to change. So that's what really established and spurred the development of our group 10 years ago was this area up here marked in yellow. So that's a cluster of mining deposits, mineral deposits and mining claims that's known as the Ring of Fire. And when the claim staking and boom that kind of went in that area about 15 years ago now started, there was all this excitement around, nickel, copper, precious metals, and chromite in the homelands. And that caused this big boom of mineral exploration. And while there is not a mine yet actually in that area, you'll see all the lines on the map is actually essentially the development that's going towards preparations for that. So there's proposed roads, there's proposed broadband that's actually going in, and it's all in preparation for those anticipated developments. So for us, that's where impact and environmental assessments really came in and really started 10 years ago, was to talk about those processes and what these developments could mean for our member communities. So while it's always nice to look at a map, I prefer to look at photos and really get a feel for what our homelands look like. And these lines here are actually from our leadership of our communities. And so the lands and waters form an integral part of the shared culture and heritage of the Metal member First Nations. And the sustained health of the environment is connected to the well-being and long-term sustainability of our communities. So in the face of unprecedented environmental changes from proposed industrial and infrastructure developments, and of course, an unpredictably changing climate, how do we ensure the lands and waters are protected for future generations? So for us, that's where the environmental and impact assessment process comes into place. So impact, environmental assessments, they're fundamental planning and decision-making tools. And as you know, for many projects, it's the first time, the first opportunity to really examine the details of those proposed projects. They're coming in from external entities, generally speaking, and they're proposed on community homelands. And so what is this process to look at all these aspects of the environment, to look at the potential impacts, and to reduce the anticipated impacts or negative impacts of those projects, and really make the most out of the opportunities that they could present. So that's where we start when we talk about impact assessments, is really bringing it back to what does it mean to the individual community, and why they should be involved, or why should they be passionate about that process and participate in it. So as I mentioned, we've gone through about 10 years in the pursuit of knowledge building in environmental and impact assessments in our member First Nations. It's been a central part of our programming for the last 10 years. But Four Rivers as a group offers holistic environmental programming. And that's really vital, especially in impact assessments, because of course, those assessments don't occur in a bubble. They are not isolated. It is not just a government written process that gets us to an endpoint. It's about informed decision-making and about being involved in those environmental discussions. And of course, you're only going to get so much out of an impact assessment as the community is able to put in. So our holistic environmental programming, I'll elaborate on it more in a moment, is really about community capacity building as a whole. So the key elements as far as us working to build knowledge and impact assessments in our communities are centered in whole community engagement. So getting everybody involved, from elders to youth, to land users, to women, from leadership to people coming home after work, to the little kids that are going to be with them. Getting everybody in the conversation and pulling from the conversation their areas of interest to make sure that their voices are heard within these impact assessments, with the goal of that informed decision making at the end of the day for the community on how and if this project's going to go ahead. clear, concise, and relevant communication materials. That is really, really at the core of trying to convey this, this technical process, and I'll provide some examples of that in a bit. Having a relationship grounded in trust, so trusting the person who is bringing you this information, bringing you this meeting, bringing you this open house opportunity, whatever it might be, those relationships take time. They don't come overnight, and they can't be expected to come overnight. You know, you're parachuting into a community and saying this project is happening and here's how it's going ahead. That's not going to sit well with anybody at any time. So again, having those relationships is so vitally important, and they take time to establish. Certainly multifaceted approaches to knowledge building. So as much as, you know, workshops and open houses kind of end up being the cornerstone of that engagement, there's so many other aspects to bring to it. And again, I'll speak to it more in a moment, but certainly hands-on, firsthand knowledge building is always the best way to go. We all learn better by seeing and touching and having those experiences firsthand than we do in just hearing about them. But good communication materials can help. Lots of photos, diagrams, etc. And of course, I'm not going to dwell on it today, but an ongoing challenge and gap is always finding community and regional capacity funding supports. It's always a gap. It kind of always will be a gap. There's always the challenge with human resources at the community level and establishing that capacity. But generally, we found there's opportunities there to be creative and innovative and make the most out of a little, and really weave together a lot of programs that that end up touching on impact assessments and environmental assessments. So I'm just going to make a mention quickly to the holistic environmental programming approach that Forest Rivers has taken over the past 10 years. Because as I mentioned, we really need to develop that community environmental capacity as a whole. So again, our vision is to create independent community lands and resource offices. So all the programming that we do is aimed at building capacity at the community level. And I often refer to this, especially when talking to government, as the capacity to receive. An impact assessment process, you know, landing on your doorstep tomorrow with a pile of documents. If there's nobody there who is tasked with looking at it, has the time to look at it, has the portfolio, has some background knowledge on it, that binder's going to sit there and it's not going to get read and it's not going to get listened to, and the community is going to miss out on not being engaged. And as a whole, that impact assessment process is going to suffer by the lack of engagement by, in our case, quite frequently, the individuals that are actually living in close proximity to those proposed developments. So we've had the luxury of offering multifaceted programming, and the list there, you know, funding for it has come and gone over the years to support aspects of those programming. But I always say, you know, we just keep swimming and baby steps, and we slowly step up as the years go ahead. So over the years, we've offered environmental monitoring training to community environmental monitors. They might be component funded. They might be on various government projects that we've been able to find funding for. But fundamentally, increasing the capacity level of technical staff at the community level has been key. Youth on the land outreach. So we've had multiple initiatives over the year. We always try to include youth in all of our programming. So whether it's getting some kids out on the water to play with some water probes and get them excited about that, or if it's speaking about bats as species at risk, it's just really about trying to help reconnect youth with the land and get them inspired to pursue further education in the environment, in geology, geography, whatever it might be, but pursue those environmental careers and hopefully someday see them back in our communities and have them be the technical experts at the table. Same with stewardship initiatives, as I mentioned, monitoring species at risk, or wolverines, bats, sturgeon, just getting more capacity out there for environmental technicians and getting the word out about these species and having those conversations and gathering community Indigenous knowledge on every front is so vital. It's always spoken about in the impact assessment process that Indigenous knowledge needs to be incorporated into all aspects. But if individual communities don't have their knowledge documented in a Western science format, it can be a real challenge to connect that knowledge with the impact assessment process, which is obviously very paper-based and kind of those traditional studies. So mapping and geomatics and GIS capacity building has been a cornerstone focus for the past 10 years, and that's very integral to a community fully participating in an impact assessment process. And again, technical capacity building, so having regional steering committees whenever possible. They've come and gone over the years, but all along the way, it's increasing that knowledge on environmental and lands and resource projects as a whole, so that the community increases their capacity to receive and have conversations about impact assessments. And again, it takes a network of environmental resources that we've been expanding and growing over the years. And there's no lack of partners that are eager to join and help. Finding the right place for them and finding the right location for them to assist, especially in impact assessment work, is always a challenge. But it really takes a team. It takes a team in the community, and it takes a team, regionally to bring these things together and build knowledge in all aspects of the environment. So again, I'm just going to elaborate on some of those key components, at least that have been our experience over the years in engaging the whole community in impact assessments and environmental assessments. So again, beyond open house presentations, they're always going to be kind of a key cornerstone because they're an opportunity to reach out to many people at once, and certainly making those open houses larger and engaging is key, right? Having a feast and having a kids corner for the kids that come out to keep them busy, so their parents can focus on the information at hand. And having some door prizes makes it fun, and having posters on the wall and having people actually interact and engage with that information is always going to be important. But especially in these times, virtual ways of connecting are very important. So we've been doing webinar series, which are on multiple topics, but every month or so we have a new one, and we did one recently on environmental impact and regional assessments, just trying to lay out what are they all about, really to get across the notion of why should I care about these processes, or why should I pay attention, why should I participate. But of course, when we're in the community, there's the opportunity to connect through local radio shows, local TV, anything to get the word out. Sometimes you're just promoting, come on out to the open house this evening. But certainly spending time in the community is the most important aspect. When possible, if the community can have steering committees set up where you can sit with groups of elders, sit with groups of land users, women, whatever's appropriate, and talk about the aspects of the project as part of that impact assessment process, to build that capacity in those relevant groups, and gather information that is important to the feedback into that process is key. And again, include the kids. They're there and they're interested. And the most important thing that we hear from elders so often is they're the future. So it's actually the elders that are promoting the inclusion of the youth, because they understand that when those youth are their age, they're the ones who are going to have the results of this impact assessment process and the projects and the developments that go in at the end of the day. So having them involved, even when they're young, is very much key to getting everybody interested. So knowing your audience and knowing the level of information that's desired to be relayed to each individual is of course important. So everybody has different levels of interest, and I'll just use a quick example of, the community leadership might be interested in the whole picture. What is this? What are all of these processes that are going on? Maybe there's multiple environmental and impact assessments going on at the same time. So they want to see, the whole picture of how is this all going to fit in? What are the timelines? And, how can this be thought of often strategically, maybe from an economic development standpoint, or, what are the changes that are going to come to the community as a whole? Whereas perhaps a trapper in the community is concerned about the actual footprint of that project. Perhaps that road that's proposed actually crosses their trap line area. And so they're going to feel those impacts the most. So they want to be involved on, how are their rights going to be protected or compensated, or how is the project going to be changed to accommodate that? And of course, elders, as I already mentioned, a lot of times, not only are they giving you the depth of their years of knowledge, but also reminding you that the youth are going to be dealing with the outcomes of these projects in the future. So really making the information that you're bringing to the table on the impact assessment or on the project, it needs to be approachable by many levels. And really the most important thing that I found to convey is that participation in this process is key. So it's fundamental to build those solid relationships. So you want the opportunity to say, I'm here today to talk about this little bit, but I'm going to be here again, and we're going to keep talking about this, and we're going to build on this in the hope that you can get that audience to come out again to hear more information, and you can build on it, right? And you reinforce that with your communication materials in between, and you try and make it palatable and fun for people to come out as much as you can as you're talking about these topics. And I can't emphasize enough is, of course, being respectful of community processes. Every individual community is different, and that's true, of course, across the nation. So that's where that relationship building is so key, is to know your specific community that is your audience and where their level of interest is in participating in this process and what this proposed development could mean to them. So communication materials, we'll spend a tiny bit longer on this one, but of course they have to be clear, concise, and relevant. So again, that's where I say know your audience. The technical level of detail that's required really depends on, of course, who's receiving it. But those technical concepts can be broken down. A lot of times, especially in working with impact assessments, the language that's used in the legislation or in the guidance documents, it has to be very technically precise, because government has to have that level of precision to avoid misinterpretation. But in engaging a community as a whole, you can sacrifice a bit of that precision for the purpose of getting across your message. Having your message heard is much more important than knowing that you use this specific term versus one that could be understood more broadly. So using visual aids is always good. Lots of photos, lots of diagrams, lots of graphics. So one of the examples that's up here in my lower left-hand corner is a visual of the mining process. And that's always fundamental to get across, is when you're talking about impact assessments, the best way to learn about an impact assessment is to be living through one, but you can't really talk about the impact assessment process very effectively when it's separate from the knowledge of what's being proposed. So while the proponent might come to the table with, this giant project description on what they're proposing to do, it could be our job as a communicator to drill down in that information and just talk about the basics of what is, in this example, what is that mine? What is that actually going to look like to the people follow the rocks, how is the rock coming out of the ground and then becoming a gold commodity? Following the water, how is water going to be pulled and discharged, and what's going to be added to it or taken away from it in the end? And it's those basics of understanding that then allows individuals to identify where their input fits into this process. Maybe they're very concerned that at the end of the day, in a hypothetical example, there's going to be a tailings pond at the end of the day that maybe that open pit is going to turn into a lake, 30 years down the road. Well, maybe a youth is concerned about that because they could see somebody someday swimming in that water. They need to have a full understanding from cradle to grave of that project to start identifying those areas of concern and those mitigations up front. And that input is so important into the process. Translation. So of course, again, know your audience, know their primary language. And if their primary language is not English, in our communities, and especially our more further north communities, it's Ojibwe or Ojibwe, have materials written in syllabics in the language that the elders speak, that the community is working to revitalize. It's a very important effort to support. And also having that live oral translation of a local translator with you. It can stretch out. Of course, a presentation like this, almost twice as long. It's hard to get simultaneous translation equipment when you're doing in-community work, but make space for that, plan ahead for that. And it's important, again, that everybody hears the message that is being said. And of course, like everything, take multiple approaches. So fact sheets that you can hand out ahead of time and have them on the table at the event and that they can take home with them. Newsletters that go out to the community to give them updates. Maps. Maps are always a great communication method. People are always eager to talk over a map, to look at a map, to discuss how is this project going to look on the land? What is it going to cross that's relevant to me? Posters, handouts, and of course, engaging presentations. So one of the examples I'll just quickly show is how we kind of drill down on the environmental and impact assessment process to convey the fundamental knowledge that needs to be conveyed on it. So where we are in Ontario, of course, we have both the federal impact assessment process and the provincial environmental assessment process. But rather than starting off a communication talking about the precise details of those processes, we kind of drill them down into these general bubbles. And then we walk through those bubbles with a hypothetical example. It's always easier to talk about a simplified example when it's not the project that is pressing in front of them, that there are likely emotions tied to, and some very real knowledge of those impacts. So if you want to convey the impact assessment process as far as an understanding of how they can be involved in it, it helps to use a hypothetical example to present a theoretical project description of, this mine and this road going in and this landscape. And then we talk about the landscape, what's the current information that's there? How is that land currently used? Is it used for teaching? Is there a wild rice picking area? Maybe there's eagles' nests or species at risk. And then we kind of pull them to the two together, right? So when that project comes onto the land, what do the impacts mean to how it's currently used? And once we convey that level of understanding on what the process is and why it's going ahead, then we can kind of pull that general understanding a bit into talking about there are government processes for this. Where are we in this government process? We're bringing this early on. There's going to be many opportunities to speak. And remember that just a general what is an impact assessment type of presentation like this, that can be a whole session. So remembering that these messages need to come again and again and be consistent, hopefully building on the audience. But if it's new audience members each time, you got to do a bit of a recap, but it takes multiple opportunities. And again, building that relationship of saying, we talked about this last time, we went through this in detail, so we're going to go a little further today. And it also is helpful for it to come from multiple fronts, but we found that we've had more success by having a consistent facilitator. So if we do a introduction to impact assessment presentation as that sort of upfront capacity building, what's great next is to have the proponent come in and talk about the specifics of their project. But the reason that that's so important is the questions community members have, they're going to be the best ones to answer it. But again, being able to then recap that in maybe an even more plain language summary in a way that you're going to bring through as the impact assessment advances is it's very important to have those multiple communication methods. And it's important, of course, to have the proponent relationship there with the community. So I could go on all day, but this is one of my last slides. So again, a multifaceted approach. Firsthand experiences is always the best way to learn. So we've spent years and multiple opportunities doing site visits. So actually visiting the land that the proposed development is going on, getting those touring things, like in this case, an open pit mine that was already established, just to get the vision of, you know, what the land looks like now, here's what it could look like down the road, just to try and develop that, that understanding, that knowledge of the project so that individuals can participate better in the process. So again, site visits, workshops, gatherings like this, even though this is virtual, I'm positive this would have been a great individual networking opportunity to learn from each other's experiences. Certainly sharing knowledge with your neighbors and learning from each other is always key and very helpful. And it really creates the opportunity then to build better processes and inspire change. So while we're working through these impact assessment processes, I feel like there's a lot of opportunity to enhance them and make them better, and identifying ways that other groups have been able to do that, you know, maybe funding they've been able to capture, opportunities. It just all works to build our capacity as a whole and increase our Indigenous community participation in these processes, and to keep trying to bridge that gap between the communities and these kind of Western processes to, of course, really protect the environment for the future, which is why we're all here. And again, it helps to be flexible, creative, and adaptive. And I understand that that's a luxury that many groups and individuals don't have. But again, it really takes a team and to create that space to capitalize on opportunities as they come on knowledge building and engagement. So again, I really do feel that everybody shares a common goal. So whether that's from the impact assessment agency to the proponent to provincial agencies that come in when they're all talking about impact assessments to, of course, the communities that are the audiences, I really do believe that everyone has the common goal of protecting the environment for our future generations. I don't think anybody can look at their kids or their nieces or nephews and feel that they want to leave the environment any worse than how they found it. So I really do keep that at the heart of our communications, that we all just want to do the best for our kids and our kids' kids. And we understand that all change and all development kind of comes at a cost, but let's have conversations about how to make that the best outcome possible for all of us to support our communities in the future. Thank you so much for listening today, and I look forward to receiving any questions. And I have my contact information up on the screen, as well as Lynn Palmer in our office, who is our environmental policy specialist. And I encourage you to reach out to us with any questions down the road. As I said, we're always eager to learn from each other and learn from our neighbors and bring those experiences to our communities so we can build our capacity together.
Miigwech, great job, Kimberly. Very well thought out presentation. I want to remind the participants of the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And if you could put any questions that you have in there that you want to pose to Kim, if you could do that, that would assist us in moving the meeting along. So Kim, here's a question that says, I'm curious to know how much of the presentations and facilitation is done by staff internally as opposed to hiring an external consultant.
Excellent question. So that's actually been at the core of developing the capacity at Four Rivers at the tribal council level. It was kind of identified early on, and still is the case in some areas that especially for impact assessment processes, it was, individuals kind of parachuting in, like I mentioned, to engage on certain aspects, engage on certain processes, but there was that lack of continuity and frankly that lack of trust and kind of that relationship, like I said, that's so vital. So again, we service 9 communities, and it depends on our individual projects we have with individual communities, whatever it might be. Yeah, the level of engagement in individual communities, like I said, it really depends. It's very project specific. In some projects, we have been engaged by some of our member First Nations almost as a consultant, kind of replacing that role of doing that facilitation. So coordinating things like open houses, inviting in proponents to do presentations, and inviting in whether it be the federal or provincial government to have those meetings with leadership. So it really depends on individual communities, and it's kind of one of those, our services are open to all, and it's always depending on that funding gap and that opportunity to replace that. But certainly, again, that capacity building at the regional level, part of the intent of that was to lessen the dependence on external consultants and to build capacity at the community level and at the regional level to take on those roles.
Well, thank you, Kim. And I have a question from Brenda. Your focus is on environmental impacts, and they're very important, crucial, in fact. What about the social and economic impacts? Would you take a similar approach? How would you help define a lasting role for women?
Wow. Okay, I'll tackle the second half in a moment. Regarding the social and economic impacts, everything beyond environment. So I always say we're a technical department of scientists, so we kind of bring environment to the table, but the way that aspect gets inserted is in elevating those community voices. It's in bringing the information to the individuals so that they have a voice in the process. So, whether it's at an open house and through questions and answers, we really work to compile all of that feedback and to get it put into the process. So that feedback, of course, is not, it's not screened. While we're presenting information on the environment, that's kind of the data that's available to discuss. But if an individual community member, asks a question about future employment opportunities, I mean, that is the area of the impact assessment that is important to them. That is what they want to learn more about. And so, we do our best to respond to that. And then maybe we take that opportunity to invite the proponent to answer that question more specifically, or to work with the economic development department more in the community to elaborate on that particular area of interest and get the community involved in areas that they're interested in. So I think there's actually there's a need to involve many communicators regionally and in the community, and get everybody on board, kind of speaking to the areas that they're most fluent in. And the same goes for feedback from community members. That's where I say it's so important to try and get everybody involved. And so that's where the role for women is really at the forefront. So we try and encourage, obviously, involvement by as much of the community as possible. And as we know, leadership of community tends to be a little bit more swung towards the male gender, but that is diversifying as years go ahead. And everybody's voice at the table is vital, and everybody's voice is important to be heard, especially in order to make these processes better. right? That's always the gap. So including things like childcare or kids corner, or, it doesn't, I've picked up, there's been a toddler in presentations that has come up and kind of tugged on my pant leg, and I put him on my hip and kept on presenting, right? So there's no need for women to be excluded from these conversations because they've got, kids in arm or whatever it might be. So it's really just ensuring that it's equal opportunity for everybody to come and learn about it, and trying to be as engaging and well-rounded as possible as far as communications materials, and getting everyone at the table, focus groups as well. When there's an opportunity, beyond focusing on youth and elders, having a women's group, as well as a land users and a trappers group, can try and provide opportunities to elevate all those voices.
Thank you, Kim. We have time for 2 more questions. The next question is says, "Hi, Kim, great presentation. COVID-19 has derailed a lot of our community consultations, gatherings, and site visits with some industry developments. Wondering if you folks had similar issues and how you work through this."
Yeah, that's an excellent question. COVID-19 has derailed, I'll say, pretty much all of our projects on one level or another. It's certainly brought to the forefront how much we depend on talking to one another in person. And certainly it's been an even larger gap and challenge to overcome, not only with communities having poor broadband or connection opportunities to join in these types of forums, but also that their limited human resources have been restaffed to, the COVID response and helping with, various states of emergencies and lockdowns. So yes, it's been a challenge that's been felt across the board, and of course across the country and the world. So as far as overcoming it, I mean, we're all just doing our best right now. So we try to do forums like this. We've hosted webinars monthly, which, we try and get the word out on Facebook to at least try and get some capacity building and information out there. In working with communities specifically on impact and environmental assessments, a lot of times our assistance is just trying to keep up and having them have the knowledge that at least somebody is on top of the communications and tracking it, so that when there's an opportunity to have a meeting, there's a spreadsheet there and it's like, okay, here's kind of what's happened when you haven't been able to be as involved as you'd like to be, and here's kind of the points we need to hit and address. And I mean, it's a challenge, and certainly a challenge in any sort of process that has regulated timelines. But we're all just doing our best to keep those communication channels. And I mean, obviously social media, Facebook is still there, online, and pick up a phone. Actually, that would be my biggest recommendation. I feel like we've all moved towards typing out our communications, and I mean, I'm as guilty of that as the next. But I had a great conversation with somebody yesterday for an hour and a half in a community that I haven't been able to connect with in the past year. And I think it was good for all of us to not only catch up, but just for our spirits really to be lifted and still connected in these times.
Thank you, Kim. We have time for 1 more question. And the question is, "Hi, Kim, would you be able to speak to the regional impact assessment being planned in the Ring of Fire, and how this regional approach adds value versus the project-focused assessments?"
So all I can really say on that is it's very much in a to be announced, to be determined setting at the moment. So certainly I will say when it first became announced in February, I know me personally, I had a little celebration. I did feel like it was what the communities had been asking for a very long time, to have that holistic overview of what's the current state of the region as a whole, and what could, not just one development, but all of these developments, what could that mean to everybody and that face of the North, in the changing environment. So I will say I'm very hopeful in the process. It certainly got stalled out with COVID, like so many other things. So I think it's really at the very starting at the starting gate as far as getting information out there, as far as what a regional assessment could look like and what that scope could include. So we're hopeful, at least as a regional body, that the information will come out and we can start on that capacity building and education piece that will be so vital to the communities participating in the regional assessment. And we're as eager as the rest to see how that will hopefully improve future project assessments in the area and get more interest and conversations going ahead. Miigwech.
Thank you, Kim. That was a fantastic presentation. And I forgot to mention that I am recording the questions that are posed in the Q&A chat box for afterwards. So I'll send them to you just so you have record of some of the questions that were posed to you in your presentation. So again, thank you on behalf of the First Nations Major Project Coalition and the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada for providing such a knowledgeable presentation. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we will now turn it over to the next video presentation. We are going to have a presentation shown from Chief Ian Campbell of the Squamish Nation here located in British Columbia. Chief Ian Campbell is a hereditary chief of the Squamish Nation and is serving his 4th consecutive term as an elected councillor of the Squamish Nation. He has been employed as a negotiator and cultural ambassador with the Intergovernmental Relations Departments of the Squamish since 1999. Chief Campbell has an MBA from Simon Fraser University and has been involved in negotiations of major projects such as LNG, forestry, hydro development, ski hill development, and land development. So now we welcome the video presentation from Chief Ian Campbell.
Hi everyone, Natha Ans Khalik Washamin. My ancestral name is Khalik. Sukiosiam Quinsnas. My chieftain name is Sukiosiam. Tinachantla Squamish Oath, Eti Kumatquim Tameo. I come from the Squamish Nation. My lineage is of the Squamish and Musqueam peoples here in Vancouver. I'm serving my 4th term as an elected official for the Squamish Nation, and I've been employed as a negotiator in intergovernmental relations with the Squamish since 1999. So I've had the great fortune of being a part of some major transformation in our relationships with the Crown, and I'm happy to articulate some of those with you today. When I started in '99, I was a youth and was brought in because of my knowledge of our traditional territory. I was fortunate to be raised by my late grandparents, who immersed me in our language, in our culture, in our rights and title, ultimately, by going out on the land, learning our mythology, our place names, our lineages, and really bringing that forward in reframing our relationships with Canada. As we've seen tremendous impact of our territory due to Western management, it's important that we see a resurgence of our traditional culture that really informs us on what the next iteration of planning and growth is for the Squamish Nation. The Squamish Nation is like many First Nations in Canada, where our demographics are largely youth, 60% under the age of 30. And it's important for us to look at opportunities to draw forward traditional knowledge and apply it in a modern context. This doesn't mean we assimilate, it means we adapt, utilizing the best tools available to us. So all of our negotiations have focused on those long-term trajectories of course, reconciliation with the Crown to assert our jurisdiction and our authority over our territories outside of treaty, but also how we build capacity and mobilize our membership to participate in the opportunities with long-term benefits. I started in '99 with land use planning, where we developed our Chai Tameoch, the Squamish Nation Land Use Plan, where we protected approximately 50,000 hectares of what we call Kwakwayoch, which loosely translates to wild spirit places, which we designated as conservancies. And this was important as it calved off around 8% of our traditional territory for long-term protection of the last remaining old-growth forests and non-industrial areas in our territory. That means 92% of our territory is open for dialogue around what types of business, where it's appropriate, and what impacts metrics we're going to use to gauge major industrial projects and other types of tenures. After the land use planning, we then moved to the acquisition of Tree Farm License 38 from Interfor, which was an important opportunity for long-term assets to build our forestry portfolio, and again, to mobilize the value chain of our members into the value chain all the way through the entirety of the forestry operations. From forestry, we then got involved in 9 hydroelectric projects, IPPs, which we then developed a strategy on through our land use plan on what systems would be appropriate for development that were not non-impacts to fish-bearing streams, but also cultural and spiritual values. One of the important things to note is that Western management has completely removed spirituality and culture from their vocabulary when it comes to management of resources or relationship with the natural world. And that's something First Nations continue to maintain, is that very important holistic approach to economy and to job creation and sustainability. So the forestry and the hydro were 2 examples of how we started to develop strategies around creating economic stimulus and ownership and equity of projects with ultimate ownership, as well as training and procurement opportunities and careers. From there, we got involved in a lot of the protocol agreements with our neighboring First Nations, as overlap issues are quite predominant throughout British Columbia. We wanted to reframe away from the Indian Act definition of who we are and reaffirm our kinship ties with one another with our neighboring First Nations. So that was with the Lillooet Nation to the north, the Shishak, the Sechelt Nation to the west, and then the Tsleil-Waututh and the Khomatquiem here in Vancouver. These protocol agreements were very important to allow us to move forward collectively and to move beyond competition over scarcity resources to an area of collaboration and shared benefits. So that led us to, of course, the 2010 Winter Olympics, which was an amazing opportunity to showcase to the world that we're not a vanished race, that we're still here. We've been invisible in our own land for far too long, where the average Canadian really has no clue of whose territory they reside in or the place names, the mythology, who we are as a people. That really was changed significantly during the 2010 Olympics when, again, we welcomed the world and we were full partners. From there, we got involved in the Master Development Agreement of Whistler Blackcomb to renew the lease for another 60 years. We thought this is a great opportunity to get involved in projects like ski hill development. That also included another project, Garibaldi at Squamish, which is still in the development stages. But these long-term assets and encumbrances of our territory necessitated the need to look to feasibility and viability. Why are we supporting projects like this? Where will they occur in our territories? And what is the cost-benefit analysis to look at the encumbrance versus the benefits that these projects will yield for the nation in the long term? So the Sea to Sky Highway upgrade was another major project in our territory that opened up not just a path into Whistler, but it really opened up the front, mid, and back country to further recreationalists and further impacts outside a treaty to residential developable lands, things like that impact the Squamish Nation in the long term. So we had to get involved in these types of projects. One of my files was doing the signage along the Sea to Sky Highway in our language for all non-safety signs that really demonstrated to the world it's not French and it's not English, therefore it must be Indigenous. And it leads people to then want to discover more of who we are and our history and the place they work, live, and play or are visiting. Of course, that signage directed people to the Squamish Lillooet Cultural Centre in Whistler, which again was an amazing opportunity to showcase to the world that First Nations are a living and vibrant culture and that we adapt to our ever-changing environment. That really was empowering our youth as ambassadors to then interface with the public, which for many people, it's their first time actually conversing with an Indigenous person and hearing the stories of the land. So the Cultural Centre is something we're tremendously proud of. All of this iterations of growth was really an opportunity to restructure and rebuild the nation, necessitated administration and management, attract and retain the best and brightest to work with us to oversee these operations, which then led to major developments like wood fiber LNG, where the Squamish Nation decided not to go cap in hand any other level of government and say, please consider our interests in environmental assessment. We opted to assert ourselves through our own authority and jurisdiction by conducting our own independent environmental assessment, which in actuality is a quasi-independent. It was utilizing existing reports and reviews, but supplementing that with Squamish Nation lenses and independent studies that we felt were gaps in the Canadian process. That yielded a number of concerns from our membership, which, to be candid, was very divisive. Many of our members didn't want to see industrialization of Athabasca, which is known as Howe Sound, especially in an area of Swayot, which is a former village site of ours that was confiscated from our people without our consent or without compensation in the early 1900s and used for industrial purposes since for the last century. So we had to really weigh these projects around industrialization of Howe Sound, where we now finally see a revitalization of the sound with the return of herring biomass, orcas, resident porpoise, and other large cetaceans that are coming back to our waters after decades of absence due to the pollution from pulp mills and Britannia mine site. So pairing that with another new industrial project really caused a lot of anxiety amongst our members, where we had to do 2 or 3 years of community engagement to conduct deep listening, to really reflect what our people's concerns were around wood fiber LNG, as well as related pipelines and compressor stations. So the 25 legally binding conditions really focused on environment first, on how to move from seawater cooling, for example, to air cooling, which then reduced effluent back into the sound, chlorinated water, heated water that would have otherwise been put back into Howe Sound. We wanted to affect positive change and make the project better by adding value and conducting our analysis around air cooling versus seawater cooling. That was one example of a condition. Another condition is moving compressor stations away from inhabited reserves, where the risk of explosion is something that our members could not accept. Even though probability is low, consequences are very high for such an incident. So we wanted to move compressor stations outside of inhabited areas into more of the rural part of our territory to really mitigate the risk around compressor stations. Those are a couple of examples of design changes, as well as directional drilling underneath the Squamish River estuary to try and minimize impacts to sensitive habitat and rearing areas for salmon and other aquatic species. So this project was very important for the nation to really delve into our own independent analysis, which really brought in the proponent to work with us and really decide together between the nation and the proponent on how we wish to, record the consultation record and how we're presenting that through collaboration and more of these environmental conditions versus prescribed consultation of the Crown. This led to 3 impact benefit agreements. One was with Wood Fibre LNG, one is with Fortis, and one was with the province of BC, where a number of these 25 conditions will apply to each of those parties for the life of the project. The last condition for Wood Fibre LNG is focused on the financial package with revenue sharing, equity, procurement, and other types of land acquisitions for the long-term holdings of the nation, primarily in fee simple, to allow us to utilize these lands adjacent to projects and other value chains. So that was really important to then bring that back to the nation for consideration. Our council supported Wood Fibre LNG narrowly. It was a very tough decision for many people, but we feel that our process was very important to reframe again the relationship with the Crown and really put First Nations into the position as a regulator versus a stakeholder. We're not stakeholders in our own land. These are unceded territories. We continue to maintain authority, and this was one important way to showcase that to the world and really help to affect positive change around amendments to legislation and other types of ways to implement UNDRIP in the calls to action, as well as the issue of consent. How to garner consent beyond consultation is very important as Indigenous people continue to rebuild our nations. As we move from LNG, it's important to note the contrast of that project versus something like Trans Mountain, which I was an intervener on behalf of the nation. We went through legal remedies to try and stop the project. Unfortunately, Canada opted to purchase the asset and run roughshod over the Squamish Nation and other Indigenous nations that are opposed to this project. When we look at the National Energy Board experience versus independent assessments and putting the Squamish Nation as a regulator issuing conditions, is stark contrast to the way the Crown mishandled something like Trans Mountain and other types of infrastructure of pipelines. There are significant questions that the nation has outstanding when it comes to Trans Mountain, such as why this location, for example, in Burrard Inlet, which is heavily congested to accommodate 400 Afromax tankers annually, is preposterous. The ability to clean up a spill, how it interfaces with salt water, with diluted bitumen, still hasn't been proven to us. And a number of other issues, for example, the extirpation of our resident orcas. Why should that be permitted? Who has the authority to say that that's a species that could be extirpated in our Salish Sea here? We find those types of decision making and that veto attitude that Canadian government brings very offensive. So we must continue to work together and collaborate with the Crown and especially other First Nations, including those upstream in the project areas where extraction occurs to ultimately where it's being shipped and shared into global markets via our territory here in the Lower Mainland. So these are huge concerns that are not going to go away. We recognize demographic projections are only going to increase in our territories. The ability for the Crown to issue rights to third-party interests atop of our Aboriginal rights and title will continue to be an agitation that, previously in my parents' generation, we had no legal recourse to challenge the Crown under Canadian law, but today we do, and we've been hugely successful in our ability to challenge through legal action. So the Squamish Nation certainly has options to consider when it comes to reframing our relations with the Crown's claims to our territories. We can pursue treaty, we can negotiate, we can litigate, we can exercise civil disobedience, or we can be complacent and allow the status quo of the impacts to our territory and the gold rush mentality of encumbering our territory and marginalizing Indigenous people. These are all human dynamics that we must straddle and navigate through. And what we've seen yields the best result is negotiations and collaboration, where we've seen long-term benefits, but also improvements in the projects by adding a Squamish lens to the projects in decision-making. We're adding value, we're creating certainty, and we're not needing to utilize the courts to define our relationships. So I hope those are good examples to help demonstrate, the progression of incremental growth. One of the things that I see as a continued anxiety for me is really, now that we've negotiated a number of projects, how do we articulate the vision to our membership effectively to mobilize our young people to then get trained and educated and get experience, whether it's in the trades or any aspect of these projects, to really mobilize and start to create wealth creation and wealth management amongst our people to move beyond abject poverty, which is a symptom of colonialism. So these are very important questions as we move forward to then mobilize membership and really give our young people the opportunity that our parents and our grandparents were denied through our relations with Canada. I hope that helps to just illustrate a little bit of the approach that the Squamish Nation took. I must emphasize the land use planning was probably one of the paramount documents that really built off of succession of leadership. As a young leader, I cannot take credit for any of these negotiations, even though I was a part of the team. These are generations of effort. So I certainly applaud and give thanks to our predecessors. Many of those big chiefs and matriarchs who informed us. We're fortunate we had many of the elders to help guide us and give us nuchnawiyah, which is words of advice on our responsibilities on how to care for each other, chinchinstway, how to look after the land and honor the spirit and honor all of creation, our relations to all of the other land mammals and aquatic species, plants, and the beauty of this territory that we're so privileged to live in. Those are all things that become part of the analysis on how we move forward. But I'll also say that now that we've negotiated a number of major projects, such as the MST lands in Vancouver. We have about 120 acres of fee simple land shared between the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. It necessitates restructuring to be able to manage these types of assets, attracting partnerships, attracting capital investment, and then the ongoing concern of implementation and management over the long term, bringing in significant revenues from these projects, and ultimately using those revenues through planning processes to revitalize language and culture, immersion of our language, our own schools, our own autonomy, and really building that capacity again within our young people. So those are exciting problems to have, but I certainly look to the resources that are needed to then build our administration, our development corporations, to attract and retain good managers and elected officials, as well as the bureaucracy of our nation to ensure that that vision is paramount in the reasons and the values and purpose of why we're doing business. It's not for the sake of business. It certainly has to meet our metrics, and we have to define those metrics, and land use planning is one of those opportunities to delve deeper. So I'm tremendously grateful for this opportunity to share with you a small piece of the progress that's being made. I certainly, again, credit my elders, my grandparents, and many of those elders who have passed on now, who passed the baton to us as young leaders to do the best we can with these responsibilities that we have, ultimately to pass that baton to the next generation to ensure that they're equipped with traditional knowledge and how to apply that in new and exciting ways using innovation and technology as a modern tool to advance our culture, just like any culture in the world. We're not static in a museum behind glass where tradition is something 200 years ago. Tradition is today, and what we do today will someday be traditional. So it's that continuity of tradition that we must really take into our hearts and minds for the purpose of why we engage in these types of projects. So thank you for listening. So I'm very grateful for this opportunity. I wish you well, and I hope you're all safe during this global pandemic, and look forward to the day we can meet in person again to continue sharing these important stories.
Thank you very much. Being extended out to Chief Ian, one of the most young, articulate leaders in the country here, and we're very fortunate to have him situated in British Columbia. We have another video presentation to do here as well, and I'm going to ask Angel to introduce Sunny Labordier.
Thank you, Dan. Hello again, everyone. Apologies for the delay there. It's the joys of doing the conference in a virtual setting. I would like to introduce our next presenter. Again, it's a pre-recorded video, just simply because they were unavailable to join us today live due to their schedules and busy lives, as I'm sure we all have. But I would like to introduce Ms. Sunny Labordier. Sunny Labordier is a Peltiquet Secwepemc Nation. My apologies if I just butchered that. Secwepemc Nation member and the Director of Transformation for the Quelminti Secwepemc, a collective united through QS G2G letter of commitment, including 7 signatories from historic divisions of the Secwepemc Nation. Sunny was the Director Governance at the Secwepemc Nation Building Initiative and Project Coordinator for the Secwepemc Nation. I'm sorry for butchering that. Sunny holds a Master of Science from the Simon Fraser University and has managed and coordinated businesses and projects for the Okanagan, Ktunaxa, Secwepemc Nations. She was the project coordinator on the SSN's Indigenous Impact Assessment process for the proposed KGHM Ajax mine near Kamloops, which was successfully completed in 2017.
Waitukakwaidup, Sunny Laborde and Squawks, Pathkai to Squamish. My name is Sunny Laborde. I am from the Pathkai to Squamish Nation, and I am the Director of Transformation for the Kwa'elminta Squamish, and am here to present for you today around lessons learned on the many different government-to-government relationships, agreements, and experiences that we've had through both impact assessment and other government-to-government relationships. And I'm here to give you a presentation today around respecting Indigenous law and building capacity through impact assessment. A little bit about me. I have been working in this field, natural resource management, Aboriginal title and rights, for over 15 years within my nation and with other nations. Born and raised at the Whispering Pines Clinton Reserve north of Kamloops. Have a number of degrees to my name in science, education, business management, which have all really come together with my lived experiences and really built the platform that I have that allows me to do the work that I do today. Wanting, however, to respect that my ancestors very much are the reason that I'm here, and they very much made sure that I ended up right where I am. Their knowledge, together with those individuals within my Quiseltican, my family, and that amazing network of knowledge keepers within my nation and other nations, have really allowed this path to unfold in front of me. So when it comes to the first section, what I would really like to talk about is this concept of walking on two legs, and specifically considerations around jurisdiction. When we take a look at the past, it really is looking at that path that Canada has taken in order to fully recognize the fact that it's not the only jurisdiction within and throughout Canada. It really has been a hard-fought path of recognition by many Indigenous peoples, nations, and communities throughout Canada, really battling against those two founding concepts of doctrine of discovery and terra nullius, which have been hard fought through cases, through negotiated agreements, and through direct action, which have really led to eventually that recognition by Canada of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and really looking to bring it into reality. And when we look at the recent Impact Assessment Act that Canada has brought forward, again, it's another step towards that true recognition of Indigenous people as decision makers in their territories. So Canada very much has this tri-judicial system, which includes the Big C Canada, the Little C, the provinces, or in our case, BC, and then that Indigenous jurisdiction. And when it comes to really walking on two legs, then it is this recognition that there are these two legs, there are these multiple facets of decision-making which exist throughout our traditional territories. Really, one of the pieces that have really helped bring this forward recently is around the recognition of Indigenous law. Indigenous law work being done at UVic through a number of different nations, and through that recognition in case law have really brought forward this need to ultimately walk on two legs and really look at Indigenous law. And when I say Indigenous law, it really is and exists outside of the Canadian Constitution. It exists outside of UNDRIP, those instruments really looking to recognize and affirm, but Indigenous law and jurisdiction exists in that inherent responsibility that we have as Indigenous people with our territories. I'm going to give you a Squamish example of really how that recognition path has unfolded since time immemorial. Of course, that jurisdiction, that law has existed forever, since time out of mind, and really more recently with the inception and colonization of our territories, there have been a number of different documents, actions, activities, events that have happened over time, which repeatedly showcase the need for that recognition. In the Squamish Nation, one of the key documents that really articulate this is the Laurier Memorial. And what's important in the memorial, which was completed in 1910, it really talks about that need to recognize our chiefs as men, that none of these lands and resources have ever been ceded or surrendered, and really talking about that need to be like brothers with one another. So when it comes to walking on two legs and the assessment process, then it really is that recognition of nation to nation or government to government relationships that needs to occur for that to be done respectfully. So in the past, what we've had is recognition, which really fell at the consultation and accommodation end of the spectrum. And now what we've seen, and what I've seen in the past, is this movement towards collaboration, towards consensus, and ultimately what we're hoping now are recognition agreements in impact assessment that are going to be founded very much as those co-management, joint decision-making types of recognition under the new BC Environmental Assessment Act and also Canada's impact assessment. So when it comes to impact assessment, one of the examples that I would like to walk through then is the SSN's project assessment process for the proposed Ajax mine near Kamloops, British Columbia. The SSN's process, very well documented, and there is quite a bit of information out there. So just to give a bit of context, the SSN is one of those historic governance campfires or divisions within the Squamish Nation surrounding Kamloops and area. And really, when it came to the development of this assessment process, of this project assessment process, it really was founded on this recognition that there are three very different jurisdictions, each who have their own laws, processes, and decisions when it comes to this proposed project. The SSN's review process has a number of different materials, including videos and booklets and things like that online. I highly recommend going to their website and checking all of that out. But some of those key components of the SSN's process include things like the panel. The panel was really developed to respect our Squamish governance and that roles and responsibilities and connection or kinship relations between the Kwiseltikin or families of both Skitchison and Kamloops, and really respect and stand up the Squamish law, which was very much grounded in Peepsith, which is the area known now as Jocko Lake. When it comes to the trout children telling, there is a specific law within that telling, which really instructs Squamish people of K'enskt, and that there needs to be special respect shown or the sky and land will turn on you. So when it came to the overall process, one of the principles that we really implemented with respect to this process was also walking on two legs in terms of how we looked at the effects assessment, to how we gathered knowledge and information, to how we developed recommendations. It really was around walking on two legs. And what I say that in terms of impact assessment and project assessment, it really was respecting that we didn't want to integrate or incorporate these two different ways of knowing and being in together, that we wanted to have that respectful recognition for everything that was in English. We wanted to make sure that we respected and applied that lens of Secwepemctsín. For things that were written, we wanted to have that oral knowledge that was shared through things like our SSN panel process and panel review. For everything that was very tangible, counting the number of fish that you're going to lose. There was that connection to the trout fishing, those intangible intergenerational knowledge transfer. All of those different pieces really contributed to the overall process, which ultimately resulted in the development of the Peepsith decision. The Peepsith decision, again, a lot of those resources can be found online. Ultimately, the panel came together. They made their recommendation to the Joint Leadership Council, who accepted those recommendations that an open pit mine was inconsistent with the land use objectives for that area, grounded and founded in the trout children telling, and as a part of geënskt, or that land and sky will turn on you. That decision was very much stood up through ceremony, through connection with the rest of the nation, and ultimately rolled out quite a while earlier than either the BC or Canada decisions. However, both BC and Canada were in agreement and came to the same decision as the SSN, that was not in the public's best interest and that it was going to have significant adverse impacts to this area and with respect to the trout children telling and to geënskt. So coming out of the SSN's process, I would say that there are a number of different lessons learned and challenges for the future. And we found and really implemented a number of principles. Again, walking on two legs was a way that really allowed us to respect that Indigenous knowledge, understanding that under the new Impact Assessment Act for Canada, there is that need to develop that Indigenous knowledge report. So I think that walking on two legs, or as other people might call it, seeing with two eyes, really served us well in the development of our process, and how we in turn then develop those processes to gather knowledge, to analyze it, to connect it back to those decision makers, to those families who were connected to that responsibility for caretaking of that area. And ultimately, it led to that need to really strongly and clearly identify what those decision-making processes look like, and to ensure that we had negotiated agreements in place which would identify those different milestone actions and activities around the decision-making process, leaving that time and space and acknowledgement that there would need to be dispute resolution triggered if there wasn't agreement between the three decisions. Also, in terms of moving forward, having clear lines of communication from your team, your assessment team, to if it is a panel, or also out to community, those lines of communication up to your leadership are absolutely pivotal, and like you just can't do what you're going to need to do if you don't have really great communication within your organization and out to your communities. One of the areas that I really do wish we had done better, and that I wish I'd done better, has to do with capacity. So first of all, you're going to need capacity to negotiate these agreements if you're going to be running simultaneous or substituted processes when it comes to assessment, project assessment, or impact assessment. You need that negotiations team, you need that negotiator, and that is something that you're going to need and want on the front end. The other piece is around capacity building for those teams to actually conduct that assessment as well. Those individuals in community, if you are calling on them, those individuals within your team, really developing a program or developing an approach which is going to actively and purposely build capacity with respect to these two different areas is going to pay dividends in terms of how you move forward and your level of success moving forward.
I want to extend appreciation to Chief Ian Campbell for his presentation, Beyond Consultation to Consent. He shared with us the incremental growth that the Squamish Nation has gone through, and how their success is based upon the mobilization of their young people while relying upon the teachings of their elders and their matriarchs. The primary goal of all that they do is to smash poverty that has become normalized in far too many of their families and move towards wealth creation and wealth management. To be able to do that requires effective plans. He touched on a number of those plans and articulated that our culture, our languages are not frozen in time. Our traditions are today, as he shared. We also want to raise our hands in respect to Sonia Labordier for her presentation. We apologize for the abrupt end of the video there. She spoke about respect, recognition, relationships, and reconciliation, walking on two legs with regards to Western science and traditional knowledge, and how the Squamish have been successful in terms of advancing their laws and their customs in every instance. And she put a real strong emphasis on capacity building from negotiation right on through to assessment. So we thank both Chief Ian and Sunny for their presentations. And should you want to get some questions to them, you can facilitate that through Angel Ransom. And we have also put a couple of documents in the chat column that you could access to be able to elaborate, embellish the presentations that we just heard. I'd like to now turn it back to Angel to introduce our next speakers with regards to the impact assessment tools and resources via video. Angel.
Thank you, Dan. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you enjoyed your short break. I know I certainly refilled my coffee cup. So I'd like to introduce our next guest presenter, Melody Lapine. Miss Lapine is a member of the Mikusukri First Nation from Fort Chipewyan, Alberta. Her traditional teachings in environmental stewardship at the young age motivated her to advance studies in environmental conservation sciences at the University of Alberta and Royal Road University. This balance of teachings in both traditional environmental knowledge and Western science has become Melody's key strength in her professional career. As the director of the Mcfn Government and Industry Relations, she is responsible for overseeing all government and industry consultations pertaining to resource development within the Mikusukri territory. For the past 16 years, she has been managing hundreds of government and industry consultation files, many of which include oil sands environmental impact assessments, regulatory interventions at hearings, and part of the development of consultation protocols, Indigenous knowledge studies, cultural impact assessments, negotiation impact benefit agreements, and developing a community-based environmental monitoring program in her community. We welcome Melody here today, and we welcome her presentation to begin now. Thank you.
My name is Melody Lapine, and I'm a member of the Mikusukri First Nation. I'm presenting out of Fort McMurray, northeastern Alberta, within Treaty 8 territory. My position is I am the director for the government and industry relations for my nation, for the Mikusukri. And today I'll be presenting on our approach to impact assessments and share some of our best practices with you today. So happy to join you all. So I'm going to be starting off my presentation, just introducing the Mikusukri First Nation. So we are one of several Indigenous nations here in our region. Specifically, the Mikusukri, we are considered to be the largest First Nation in the region. There's estimated about 3,000 members of the nation, primarily located all within this Athabasca region. And as I noted in my introduction, we are a part of Treaty Number 8, and our traditional territory and the area I kind of will be referencing today is including a large portion of the northeastern Alberta, including the Athabasca, oil sands, tar sands area. For the Mikusukri, we really value our treaty rights, our inherent rights to continue to live off the land, exercise our rights to harvest, pass on culture, and basically carry on with our way of life. And this is something that's pretty important, and it's very important in impact assessments. It's fairly important in consultation, the work that I have to oversee. And so a big focus of my presentation today is going to be talking about our connection to the land and why impact assessments are important for us to be involved in, especially in a region like ours where there's intensive development. The next slide here is kind of just geographically showing you the area that I'm talking about. So with my mouse pointer, the community that I'm from is a small northern isolated community. It's fly-in only. You can access it this time of year with a winter road. And it's on the north shore of Lake Athabasca. So right here, right, it really kind of just borders the Wood Buffalo National Park. And so this area here is, my previous slide really indicated that we refer to ourselves as people of the Delta. So the Peace Athabasca Delta is really the heart of our territory, our home. And it's a very important place. So when I say we are the people of the Delta, that really means we're from this area here. That's our sort of our heart and our focus area. The Athabasca area is really this large area here along the Athabasca River. And Fort McMurray, where I'm presenting from today, is where I'm out of my home. I live here in Fort McMurray, so roughly about 200 kilometers just south of my community. So when I refer to the traditional lands of the Mikusukri, it really encompasses a large portion of this, because we have exercise and use and members living up in Fort Smith, Northwest Territories, to Fort McMurray, to Fort Mackay, and so a large portion of this area. The Peace River and the Athabasca River are really, really critical for us because they flow directly into that area I referenced as the Delta. So anyway, this is kind of just showing you where we're situated. If you take the Wood Buffalo National Park, so Wood Buffalo National Park is Canada's largest park, as you can see here in green. Thankfully, there's no development in it because there's a lot of development happening just outside of it. And so some of the challenges in my work is really dealing with the pace and scale of development. This photograph really just shows you just how much activity is happening, from roads to open pit mining, in situ projects for extracting oil and bitumen, as well as all of those ancillary applications that go along with it, such as pipelines, transmission lines, camps, natural gas facilities, cogeneration facilities. And of course, when you build one project, there's often expansions and add-ons to it. So there's a fair bit of disturbance in our region. And so one of the things that is concerning for us, of course, is the issue of cumulative effects and the proximity of downstream and some of the impacts that are facing the north, which is, again, that focus area, our core of our territory, which is the Delta, again, in this area here. And everything flows north, and of course, downstream issues are very critical for us. So over the year, in dealing with all of those projects and all of those activities, we've been really dealing with what we consider poorly done impact assessments. And we've been very critical. Every time we review a new application, we say we have a lot of questions to ask, and many times not provided the answers. So I'll give some examples later about what types of questions we ask and why impact assessments really can't answer those types of questions coming from the community. Mainly because the challenges that we see with a lot of modern day impact assessments is that they really only focus on the biophysical. So they'll look at, for example, bison and bison habitat as an example, and how a project or an activity might impact bison and bison habitat. But they won't really go further in answering some of our questions, which is, well, how would these impacts to bison ultimately impact the Mikisu way of life? So we harvest bison, and so how would those impacts eventually end up impacting the Mikisu? Or will the bison be safe to eat if this project and this activity goes ahead? The quality of the resource and the quantity. With that many projects in the area of the bison range habitat, would that cause any significant impacts to a decline or change in bison population? If so, how would that change in population affect Mikisu's use and harvesting of bison? So those are the types of questions we often ask, but they just, again, only focus on the biophysical requirements in their impact assessments. We often see that the big questions we have about cumulative effects, like how does this all add up? what is this project in addition to all of the other projects that came before it, and how is that cumulative effect being assessed, and in relation to how does that cumulative effect affect the Delta? How does that cumulative effect affect the Mikisew way of life, our culture and our rights, and so on and so forth. So cumulative effects often only become, we find in a lot of impact assessments we review, are only kind of added on at the very end. We also find challenges in impact assessments is that our Indigenous knowledge, our experts, our land users, our elders, their knowledge is not deeply engaged included in impact assessments. So they're often an afterthought, much like cumulative effects. They're kind of sometimes come at the end if they even get included at all. And so that's we find is a fundamental flaw with environmental assessment, is without Indigenous knowledge, Mikisew knowledge to help assess impacts on Mikisew, then these assessments, in our opinion, are poorly done. One, because they're not answering the questions that we really need to know to understand how a project will impact us and our way of life and our rights, but also that they exclude the knowledge to help do that assessment. And then also to even go further, to our knowledge could also help come up with mitigation. So if we help identify what an impact is with our participation and knowledge, then we can also help identify and be included in the discussions about minimizing those impacts. Another concern with us about assessments is they look at current rights, current use, sorry. And so I'll give an example here. Is they often use only project-specific approach. So for example, when they'll look at, okay, Melody, I went berry picking at this proposed project site. I got, a couple of dots on a map that says, okay, Melody went berry picking here in 2019. And they don't really examine the full extent of what that use is in relation to culture and rights, and why, that site is important for berry picking, how it affects, for example, my children, my great-grandchildren, etc. So it extends far beyond just looking at current use and a site specific. So we look at things much broader and more holistic. So those are some of the just few examples of some of the challenges we face in some of the impact assessments that we've been reviewing over the last decade or more. And then we circle back to something that's really important to Mikisew. We've been involved in several court challenges. One of them, a very important one, resulting in the Mikisew decision of 2005 out of the Supreme Court on the duty to consult. And so we take this very seriously. We really put a lot of responsibility, as we should, on the Crown to ensuring that consultation is done adequately. And I'm just going to tie this back to the realities of impact assessment, because the duty to consult really is tied to impact assessments, because consultation really is about not only just engagement and going through a process, but it really is about understanding what decision is going to be undertaken on behalf of the Crown on this proposed activity. And the consultation that's all included in that Crown consultation process is really about understanding what that project is and how it will impact Mikisew. So that is really an important part of the duty to consult. And we want to make sure that that is done adequately with meaningful participation and inclusion of Mikisew. So then comes the accommodation piece, which is probably sometimes even more important than consultation itself, because the accommodation piece is really then the so what. What are we going to do about these impacts? We can go through the consultation process, try to understand the assessment and examine what the impacts might be on Mikisew rights and culture. But again, what is the so what? What are we going to really do about it? And so this is where we can have a lot of influence on trying to minimize what those impacts are. Things like changing the location of a project, changing the way a project will develop, maybe, for example, reducing air emissions, water use and withdrawals from important tributaries, cultural areas. And so those are all the aspects of accommodation. And so the assessment piece is really important to get done right through the consultation phase, because it really, all of that information is really going to be critical in ensuring that accommodation can be achieved. And that's about avoiding or minimizing those impacts on Mikisu culture, rights, and way of life. So we like to study what matters to us. We know that there's significant changes with the federal impact assessment process under the new act, but we often have to rely as well on provincial legislation and ways of doing provincial-led impact assessments, which is not as comprehensive as the federal process. We are quite pleased that the new federal process is now, to require and incorporate things like Indigenous knowledge, importance of participation and consultation, as well as assessing impacts on rights, which was something we were strongly advocating for under Bill C-69. So here we are today with the new legislation, but we're also working in somewhat of a historical context under the provincial context that hasn't caught up with the federal legislation. So for example, cultural assessments is not required in our provincial process. So some of the expressions of concerns is that these assessments are not studying what is important to us. So we think that we should be studying what really matters to us. And so I used an example earlier about bison. And so bison, wildlife, moose, caribou, and water. I would say water is probably the most critical for us because, again, going back to the Delta, we're sort of the catch-all of everything. If some of you are really kind of know how a delta functions, it's an accumulation of sediment and everything is flushed down. And so that's where the health of the delta is really deteriorating because we're catching so many of everything coming from the Peace and the Athabasca side, which is really just a short distance away from massive, again, oil sands extraction. So for example, some things that we consider to be important in impact assessment questions we have is how much water is necessary to navigate through our territory. So this is something we know we can answer. We have that knowledge and our Indigenous knowledge, our knowledge holders can answer this, but this is something that is not asked in an impact assessment. It's not asked by the Crown. It's not asked, the proponent is not asking these types of questions that I have listed here. But these are really important to us, for proponents and for the Crown to ensure it gets answered. So if we don't know how much water is necessary for us to navigate in a tributary where a project is going to be withdrawing water, then again, they're going to be only examining the biophysical aspects. So this is how much water we should be able to take from the river. And these are the biophysical impacts it will cause on things like fish habitat, riparian areas, and all the water quality, limnology, and all of those water aspects. But then the important thing is, okay, well, what does that all mean in terms of impacting the Mikisu? We use that river too, like the fish do. We rely on it as an important aspect. So for navigation. So how will that withdrawal impact the fish, but also how will it impact the Mikisu ability to use that river if that much water is going to be withdrawn? So those are the types of questions we ask in these assessments, and we often never get adequate answers or responses. So, so some of the principles about the way that we like to take on some of these assessments is answering the questions that I had on that slide. And those are often done by including Indigenous knowledge, by including Mikisu to participate very early in the stages. For example, at the time of drafting a terms of reference for an impact assessment. We say we should have a say in what to say and make it a part of the terms of reference, which is determining what should go into the impact assessment. Including us at that stage really saves a lot of time for it later. Because when we start to ask the questions and we have the Crown asking the questions and we have then proponents wanting to ask the questions of their own projects and how it's going to impact, for example, Mikusukri navigation, or is that bison safe to eat, then they have to end up doing that later in the process. And that often causes delays in the regulatory process, delays in expanding the timelines of these things. So if we get it right in the first place and we study what matters, then they can save a lot of time and resources and having to do catch up later. So this slide sort of explains just very general principles of how we like to undertake and participate in impact assessments. Again, we want every assessment to consider the nature and scope of our rights, our treaty and Aboriginal rights, our inherent rights, our way of life, and how those rights will be impacted, and they would need to be assessed as part of that application. Our impacts, the impacts go beyond the biophysical. Okay, so water withdrawal is going to impact the water flow and water quantity of a river, but how is that ultimately going to impact Mikusukri? So it's not just looking at the biophysical, which I spoke about earlier. We also say that they need to consider the historical and contemporary cumulative effects in which rights are exercised. So don't put cumulative effects at the back end, and don't do cumulative effects included in your impact assessment starting today as your baseline. You need to go to way back as far as you can, pre-development, early 1960s if you can, where as early as possible, so we can really see the changes over time on cumulative effects, because all of that added up has a significant impact on our rights and our way of life. Another thing is we do not want them to just only look at local site-specific impacts. Again, Mel berry picked on this site. However, there's a lot of other berry picking sites. And so you can go elsewhere. There really is not going to be an impact on you because, the site-specific locations you showed can be mitigated because there's so much other areas for you to do that in your territory. So we say, don't just look at the site-specific, look at the broader, again, cumulative effects. For them to utilize an Indigenous perspective and Indigenous knowledge, this is absolutely imperative. So we look at things from a completely different lens. Again, our criticisms on past assessments is because we're looking at it from that different lens. We're looking at things in a holistic manner. We're looking at things that affect us in the Delta, that affect us right here in Fort McMurray, that affect, a larger impact. And so the scope is often too narrow and too confined. And as well as our knowledge, we think, can help broaden that. Again, we can help answer some of the questions that we have and some of the important questions the Crown needs to know about under the duty to consult. And we have the ability to help answer some of those questions, as well as identify some of the solutions and mitigations and how to minimize, potential impacts that we may identify through that assessment process. Our values, our norms, and our laws, we have those things customary in our communities. We think they should be included in these impact assessments as a way of relationship building, supporting reconciliation and collaboration is in that strong inclusion. Engage rights-bearing community as part of the assessment, including consideration of methods and indicators. So, for example, going back to some of the points I made about including Indigenous knowledge and answering some of those important questions, is that collaboration and participation at as early as a stage is not necessarily just at the assessment stage, it's at the terms of reference stage, it's at the scoping stage, it's at the developing the methodology on how they're going to do the wildlife assessment. Everything from the way they're going to be plotting and doing aerial observations and bird counts and moose population counts, like all of those types of things is where we can assist in how they do that through their methodologies. It's instead of including Indigenous knowledge at the very end, at the very beginning is much more meaningful. Thresholds need to be identified. So when we identify an impact, and this is a good example is on that water withdrawal example that I provided, is that when that company is going to be withdrawing water from an important river system, I asked the question, well, how is Mikisu navigation going to be impacted by this? And we would like to determine that through an assessment. And when we do that, what are we measuring against? So how do we measure what that impact is? So unless we could say what Mikisu needs to sustain our rights and culture and how much water we need to navigate without any withdrawals and just natural processes. And then you add on the anthropogenic, these projects taking water out of that system. What are those impacts? So that we can determine what a threshold is. Company A, you can only withdraw this. Company B, this. And so there's these incremental things. And then company E comes along way later and they're looking to withdraw water. And now we're reaching that threshold of where it's going to impact our navigation. Companies A to C may have been within that, outside of that threshold. So they're okay. They're not affecting our navigation. But company D, sorry, it's either all those other companies need to reduce their withdrawals in order for you to get some water, because we should not have to lose our ability to navigate and have our rights impacted that much where we cannot no longer use that river system to navigate, because then we are in a treaty infringement issue and we are trying to avoid that. That's the whole purpose of this consultation and doing these assessments, is to avoid and minimize those impacts. The last point, assessment of impact to the exercise of rights should consider a project's outcomes towards reconciliation. So at the end of all of this assessment, and we've done things right by including these principles, then we should be able to understand how a decision is going to be made by the Crown. What is it going to be an approval? Is it going to be approval with these sets of conditions on how they are to develop this project? What are those conditions? And how do those conditions reflect, minimize, and avoiding impacts to Mikisu culture and rights? So, and then if we can get to these and we can reach accommodation with the Crown, then we think we are supporting the Crown's efforts and the proponents' efforts and Mikisu's efforts towards reconciliation. I just want to close my presentation with a really important quote from one of our really renowned elders that really does a lot of work with me, Elder Terry Martin. And this came out of the tech hearing. It was a major hearing, major project, strong participation. We did a culture and rights assessment. We did a lot of inclusion of Indigenous knowledge, a lot of things done right, in our opinion. And it was really all about certainty. And that is what the Mikisu approach is we need some certainty that all of these activities, all of these projects going on in our territory, that we have some assurance that the identification of impacts are being properly done through these assessments. But importantly, they are being minimized and mitigated and accommodated when we do find there are significant impacts, and we're doing something about it. Again, the so what? For elders like Terry Martin, who then sees value in being a part of impact assessment because it's making a difference. And so we call that the Nichinohan Framework, which is a cultural framework in cultural preservation of protecting our rights, our inherent rights, our rights to harvest and use our territory. And, you know, at the same time, impact assessments being done right, projects are proceeding, we are mitigating, minimizing, and avoiding and accommodating those impacts. So that concludes my presentation. Another quote from an elder that is no longer with us today, Elder Sal Martin. And again, water is boss in Mikisu worldview. Our delta is everything to us. And so that's the frame that we, and the priority that we we undertake in all of the work we do in impact assessments. So, well, that concludes my presentation. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Angel for inviting me to be a presenter in your conference. I hope some of the information I shared, it was meaningful and informative, and happy to share any further materials with all of you. For example, our methodology on how to assess impacts on rights is something that we co-produce with the agency. So yeah, no, happy to share. And again, thank you all, and look forward to other presentations during the conference.
Thank you very much, Melody. Great presentation. I understand that Melody is with us as well and available to answer any questions that are posed by the participants. As in the past, I ask that you use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen to place your question there, and then I will pose it to Melody. So we're waiting for that first question to roll in here. Maybe I could start off, Melody. What's the most difficult aspect of your work? If there's just that one thing that you were able to address that would lead to greater performance, what would it be?
Hello. Biggest challenge, great question. I would say timelines. I spoke a little bit about just the pace and scale of development. So there is a lot of activity. So just really trying to keep up with really pressing deadlines. Sorry, my camera was shut off there. I think you did hear me though, about pressing deadlines and really just capacity issues and trying to keep up and manage those deadlines. Regulatory processes and timelines are fairly fixed. And for example, a few years ago, I was challenged with, about 200 active regulatory applications. So trying to respond to things like, drafting statements of concern, letters of objection, negotiating impact benefit agreements. So doing all of those things at once, and at the same time, trying to meet a regulatory deadline with limited capacity, I would say is probably the first and foremost biggest challenge.
Thank you, Melody. And within your presentation, you outlined a number of ways about how you've been able to enhance your capacity and begin to engage with all of your people. I have a question here, Melody. Hi, Melody. Could you share about how the principles for EA-IA were developed? And was that pre-COVID, or how did you do it? How did you do that work?
Yeah, it's been works, I think, for a few years. It really came, I think, to fruition and really shared, I think, through that example I provided at the end with the Tech Frontier, which is it was a very important project for us because it was so close to the Delta. So the furthest north project, also a very large, would have been the largest open pit mine in the region. So we put a lot of time and effort and resources into assessing and understanding that project. So the principles, I think, have been there, but we really sort of formalized it when we started to talk to the agency and the government about how we were going to develop a methodology, how we were going to actually do an assessment to understand impacts on rights and culture. So the principles are really a part of developing that methodology on how to do that assessment. So pre-COVID, I would say. Sorry, yeah, this would have been done about 4 or 5 years ago.
Thank you. Thank you, Melody. Any other questions for Melody? Okay, Melody, here comes one more. Thank you, Melody. That was a great presentation. Further to the information you provided in your presentation, what advice would you give to Indigenous nations who are concerned about the impact of major projects which are in the pre-planning phase, like the Diefenbaker Canal on the Saskatchewan River Delta?
I think if my advice would be is start to identify what thresholds are, like defining what thresholds are important. So study what matters. And so we would love to have the ability to identify and define thresholds so that we can do better impact assessments on assessing impacts on culture and rights. So I use the example of navigation and the amount of water required in the river to support our use in navigation of the river. So for example, during low flow periods for us is in the fall, and that's hunting season. That's when we get in our boats and we got to navigate throughout the Delta and throughout many places to access spiritual sites, to access cabins, hunting sites, fish camps. And so navigation is really key. And so we focus on identifying a threshold, and we called it our base flow. What flow of water is necessary in the Athabasca River and supporting tributaries to allow us to use that. So we actually quantified it based on the community values, on just getting in a boat, packing it with a moose, with your family, with all your supplies needed. And this is how much water we need to navigate. Now, this is our threshold. So everything that's going to withdraw water from that system to support industrial activities needs to be measured against that threshold. And so that was one of the things I spoke a little bit about, and as well as bison and thresholds for bison. So my recommendation is start to define those things as early as possible. And again, study what matters, because there's only limited time and limited resources and capacity. We want to do everything, but there's just, again, it's challenging to try to do everything. So focus on the priorities. For us, it was water quantity because of the volume. It takes 3 barrels of fresh water to produce 1 barrel of oil up here. So there's extensive withdrawals of water. And so again, thresholds of how much water to support our rights was something that we defined. So get out there and try to define those thresholds for your community. So when you're doing those assessments, you're measuring against something that matters to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Melody. And you have time for just a couple more questions. One question here is, how have you dealt with IA time constraints within the legislation?
Well, we're actually just going through the new legislation for the first time now with a new project that's just proposed. We haven't gone through it. So all previous assessments were done through like SIA 2012, that legislation. So the timelines in the previous one weren't too bad. There was a lot of stopping the clock, time to catch up, but a lot of it now is proponent driven. So we are not really able to influence timelines, unfortunately. However, we do recognize that a bulk of the work and avoiding a lot of work later on, which could really constrain timelines, is doing a lot of that upfront work as early as possible. Things like getting thresholds identified, getting baseline information and data, coming up with when you find an impact, setting yourself up for what potential mitigation options to help with accommodation discussions. So a lot of the pre-work and a lot of the heavy lifting done as early as possible, I think will really help with some of those pressing timelines and deadlines that we really have little influence over.
Great. Thank you very much, Melody. Just one more question before I go to Angel to introduce our next presenter. Melody, how did you work on building, learning, defining, studying those thresholds in regards to capacity, people and money, especially for studies and knowledge gathering? We are starting to build a specific assessment in the coming year and really love the work you've done.
Yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, I really would like to have the ability to define and develop more thresholds. How we developed that one was because cumulative effects management frameworks in this region neglect to incorporate Indigenous knowledge and understanding the cumulative impacts on Mikusukri rights. So our treaty and Aboriginal rights specifically. And so the example I gave was very site specific. So as long as if you can demonstrate you're using a specific area where that activity is going to happen, so in this case an open pit mine, and you have areas within your territory that have similar use capabilities or abilities, then they're always going to, our findings were, and this was really quite frustrating for us, is that as long as there's a furry animal over there, a moose over there, or a tributary over there, your rights won't be impacted because you can go elsewhere. So we can mitigate those cumulative effects because you have so many other portions of your territory available to you. So we then basically rejected that notion and instead focused on looking at things much more broader and more cumulative and adding up all of the impacts and then showing, for example, this is how much water altogether is being withdrawn. This is how much air emissions, this is how much and habitat is being taken up. So yeah, I would say that would probably be the main answer for that. That was a long question. I don't know if I fully answered it, so I forgot most of it halfway.
You did a great job, and a lot of the question was just heaping praise on you and your nation for the work that you do. Thank you very much, Melody, for a very comprehensive and inspiring presentation, and we appreciate your contributions to our program. Masai. Virtual hug. There's a virtual hug for you, Melody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you, Angel, to introduce our next presenter, please.
Sorry, just give me one quick second here.
Okay. You're adjusting your makeup? Getting a new
No,
hairstyle?
sorry, I was just having a screen delay on my end. I just had to replug something in. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. So our next presenter is Mr. Sheldon Watney. So I've got his bio here in front of me. And so I'll just read it as is. So as the current Chief Executive Officer and President of the Saskatchewan First Nation Natural Resource Center of Excellence, it is the role of Mr. Watney to assist and support 74 First Nations in developing sound decisions regarding the sustainable natural resource development in treaty and traditional First Nations lands. The leadership confidence in his position is based on previous governance and management experience, as well as negotiations between First Nation groups, government, and industry relating to the initiatives such as the Enbridge Pipeline's Alberta Clipper project. Mr. Watney's experience relating to the initiatives, rereading. Mr. Watney's experience also includes extensive involvement in the Saskatchewan federal government duty to consult and accommodate processes. As the leader of this organization, Mr. Watney consistently managing, negotiating, and consulting to advance the interests of Saskatchewan First Nations across a broad scope of natural resources, including petroleum, oil and gas, uranium, potash, forestry, diamond mining, etc. As an immediate appointment, Mr. Watney has worked alongside First Nations in Saskatchewan in the development and implementation of the Accelerated Site Closures Program, which focuses on the reclamation of inactive or abandoned oil and gas wells and facilities throughout Saskatchewan. On behalf of the impacted First Nations along the North Saskatchewan River system, Mr. Watney has appointed to incident command at the time of the Husky 1610 oil spill in Saskatchewan, which was in 2016. Mr. Watney provided a platform to reform the management of natural resource disasters, including the creation of an independent third-party assessment framework for First Nations. Mr. Watney has also played an integral role in the development of the Indigenous Advisory and Monitoring Committees in relation to the Enbridge Line 3 replacement project and also the Trans Mountain Pipeline through work with the impacted Indigenous groups across Western Canada, and contributed to the work the Natural Resources Canada and the Canadian Energy Regulator. As a member and former chief of the Red Pheasant Cree Nation, Mr. Watney's skills in creating meaningful engagement with First Nations, government, industry is informed by my vision, values, and drive to protect cultural and growth, is informed by his vision, values, and drive to protect cultural and grow prosperity. My apologies for my stumbling of words. I always get a little tongue twisted pronouncing Saskatchewan, so pardon me. So I would like to turn the attention over to Mr. Watney's video presentation.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sheldon Watney. I'm currently the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Saskatchewan First Nations Natural Resource Centre of Excellence. I'm originally from Red Pheasant Cree Nation, just south of North Battleford here in Saskatchewan. I was able to spend some time as chief of my First Nation for 4 years, as well as tribal chief of the Battleford Agency Tribal Chiefs Tribal Council. I've now been in my role here at the Saskatchewan First Nations Natural Resource Centre of Excellence for just the better of 10 years, and I spent a lot of the latter years, I guess the last 3 or 4 years specifically, dealing with a lot of issues around environmental impacts, impacts to our lands and waters here in Saskatchewan. I'm originally from what is called the Number Treaties area, from Treaty 6, and my responsibilities in my professional role are to assist and support our First Nations in Saskatchewan from all treaty areas. So we have 5 treaty areas here and deal with many different factors. In regards to our centre, again, it's wholly owned by the 74 First Nations under the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations here in Saskatchewan, the FSIN. And again, in my daily role, we deal with many issues, and we have quite a broad mandate, similar to other organizations, at least across the West, First Nations Major Projects Coalition, the Indian Resource Council of Canada, and try to respond to aspects or issues that do arise in relation to natural resource development. And we've had quite the process the last handful of years in relating to mitigating or working to mitigate and support our First Nations communities, our elders, our leadership, our membership, our youth, in trying to not only understand what resource developments mean to our communities, but also trying to help support better participation. And when we look at the role of regulators, if we're looking at a specific RM, a municipality, urban municipality, a provincial regulator, and at times a federal regulator, processes can get quite arduous and confusing, especially when we're trying to engage or participate as First Nations people and looking to bring our membership forward to participate as well. So that's an important area of support that we look to provide here at the Centre of Excellence, with direction from our board of directors here. My board of directors consist of an appointment from a chief or council member from each of the tribal councils across Saskatchewan, as well as an appointment from the executive of the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations. So it's a good opportunity to provide direction, but also a great opportunity for engagement and ensuring that we continue that accountability back to our nations and our membership of those nations. And we're looking specifically at aspects of the impact assessment and the recent changes in 2019, and gauging on how we move forward into the future. There's a lot of work to be done, but it certainly is work that we look forward to, and work to build capacity, ensure that we're focusing on building that capacity into the future. Not just for us as organizations, but certainly for our communities and membership within our First Nations communities. When projects are looking at being proposed, certainly many times the flags go up, and not only flags raised by our leadership, but certainly our elders, our medicine gatherers, our hunters, our gatherers, our fishermen, fisherwomen. They do a lot of that work, And innate to that work is certainly ensuring that there is a strong focus on keeping our culture, our traditions, our spirituality, and our ceremonies alive and healthy. And a lot of times, we are taught by our elders that in order to practice our ceremonies, in order to gather medicines and hunt, it needs to be clean. And so there's a lot of different avenues that we need to be mindful of outside of industry or government, but us as First Nations people, that we need to be mindful of when we're engaging or speaking with or participating in any type of project, impact assessment, consultation, all these types of factors. And so it is important for us in our positions and leadership within our nations to be able to help along to educate and share information so that everybody understands some of the potential impacts that projects can bring to a First Nation or a territory. When we are meeting with our elders, oftentimes it comes to the question of what are we here for? What are we participating in? And I think, as clear as we can make it for them to be able to understand and provide their guidance and direction is of utmost importance. And I go back to some of the teachings that we had received from our elders. We had, the responsibility of developing an independent environmental assessment of the North Saskatchewan River when we were dealing with the Husky 16 tan oil spill back in 2016, and that was about almost a 3-year process. And we had engaged and worked alongside our leadership and elders and membership from our nations along the North Saskatchewan River, from Thunderchild all the way down to Cumberland House in eastern Saskatchewan along the river. And the concerns, issues, and feedback, not only one meeting but at many meetings, we were very grateful to receive, and certainly guided us and gave us direction on how to approach not only the regulators but also the proponent or the company Husky. So that provided a real basis of our relationships and how to move forward. At the end of the day, yes, it's about ensuring that we're able to clean up or mitigate any type of environmental impacts associated with that type of scenario in terms of an oil spill into a river. But it is extremely devastating, and being guided by our elders and being able to work with environmental scientists and others of the like, we were able to approach and be involved and integrated into mitigating that issue, right from incident command to again developing environmental assessment associated with the spill. So I think my thoughts are, in terms of the new way, the new legislation and new focus moving forward, that being able to have that integrated participation is absolutely critical. First Nations need to be involved early, very early in project design and pre-disturbance, prior to anything going into the ground, and even geophysical studies that maybe don't physically penetrate the ground, but there are studies that do occur ahead of time to identify perhaps where minerals are, what the deposits are, those types of things. There's no reason why our people cannot be involved that early in a project when you're looking at fostering the idea and bringing it forward. It doesn't have to be once the dozers or the excavators are on the ground, then let's bring the First Nations in case we dig anything up. There's great value, I think, in participating and again being integrated. It's not just being able to participate with jobs, maybe the odd contract, those types of things, but really having, the opportunity to participate at all, at all spectrums, at all levels within a project, from design to executive, and having those discussions. It's extremely important for presidents, vice presidents within, industry to be able to develop that relationship as well with our First Nations. It does, I guess, play a frustration factor when we have our chiefs, our council members meeting with only certain staff within a company. And that's always something that I've always advocated for and adamant about, was that, chiefs and council members, elders, they should be meeting with the leaders of the respective companies as well, to ensure that relationship is built. Without any disrespect to anybody else that's involved, but that's where the relationships need to lie, and the direction and the guidance given to those that will be working in technical capacity within a project. I think that will go a lot further. I know I spoke a bit about traditional knowledge, Indigenous knowledge, all these types of things, and I can't second guess, or downplay by any means the importance of that. And with respect to our elders, our medicine people, our hunters, our gatherers, it's absolutely critical that we retain our relationship with Mother Earth, Kigawinoaski, with the Creator, Semantu. Our lives are guided by teachings that we have had passed on to us from our elders. The sweetgrass, the other medicines, the wikis, these types of things that are utilized every day within our homes are critical. There's many other medicines that our elders share with us. Some are widely used, but some are very sacred. And oftentimes our elders and medicine gatherers, they don't necessarily share outright where those medicines are located, because they're so sacred, and they want to ensure that they're kept safe for use for generations coming forward. And I think that, as we engage and participate and take that guidance from our elders, that aspect of spirituality is extremely important. And just because a project comes into a certain area and it's a great idea, I think it's important that we don't expect, and I'll say as industry or as a sporting organization, we can't expect elders, leadership, and a nation to just automatically support a project because it's a good idea. There's many other factors that leadership and elders and nations are dealing with internally. And, we have to look at that spiritual connection to the land. And I share this more and more at our meetings and in discussions around the connection to Mother Earth and the responsibility that we carry as First Nations people, as stewards of the land. And we have a teaching in our Cree ways of life called Pastahoin. And that teaching, we are told that, if we do something adverse, negative, that may hurt Mother Earth, others, the Creator, that we expect it to come back to not us, but our children or our families. And all of us carry that responsibility because it's taught in every one of our homes as Cree people. And some liken it to karma, those types of things, because we're taught to try and go forward in a good way, because if we don't, then again, we don't want to bring negativity to our families. And it won't happen to us, it'll happen to others. So it's with that teaching first and foremost that many of our leaders, our elders, engage and participate in a project. And so they're always gauging what does it mean to us? What does it mean to our children, our grandchildren? What does it mean to the future generations? And can we balance that out with that pastahuin, that teaching? That's the real question. So when we're looking at issues around impact assessments, aspects of engagement and consultation, employment, contracts, maybe equity participation in a project, these are all engaged on that simple teaching of pastahuin, and I think that's very important to ensure that that many understand. It's a responsibility that we carry, and it's passed down from generation to generation. As we move through in Saskatchewan, specifically in some of our First Nations that are involved in projects, and looking at some of the areas, whether we're engaged or in the area of resources such as uranium, potash, oil and gas. We have a very resource-rich area here, and we understand that Saskatchewan is a province, but we also even better understand that this province is underlying issues around treaty and treaty obligations. And what does that mean? What does treaty mean to a project? What does that mean to a company that wants to develop a certain mine or oil and gas development? And these are all issues that we speak to and converse about and discuss first and foremost before any type of scientific report that comes on a desk. So that's a real important aspect, I think, that industry needs to understand, is that they need to do their best to learn, to educate themselves about inherent and treaty rights in Canada, and more specifically here within Saskatchewan. And I often offer that opportunity to be able to share, because just as much as you are looking to learn more and educate yourselves as industry about inherent rights and treaties, reciprocally, there's a lot of learning and educating as well in the scientific world. And it gets to be a very difficult process at times to be able to balance out Western science with our traditional ways of life. And sometimes they don't correlate, and it's difficult to collaborate, it's difficult to participate. But I think that with respect to the Impact Assessment Act, it's given our people a renewed voice, I'll say. In years past, we didn't have that voice, and that was namely due to legislation and regulations. We come from a past that isn't very positive at times. Many of our people, obviously have attended residential school, industrial schools. We were, victims of a pass system as well, a permit system on our reserves, where we weren't able to sell resources off reserve unless, we had an Indian agent say that we could. And others, the 60 scoop, day schools, all these types of issues that we've had to live through. And now expected to fully participate in the economy that's had 100 years to grow while we were marginalized from it, and be able to say yes and understand and be able to participate and share. So I think it's important that we respect that everybody needs to respect that every person is at a different stage, and every nation is at a different stage. So if we can look at that with respect to, welcoming and incorporating, traditional or First Nations knowledge it's very important that that's where the starting point is. Here around our area, we come from a again, a time, we have what some call the Riel Rebellion. We term it a little more correctly, the Riel Resistance. And evidently, a fallout from that was the hanging of eight warriors, near just outside of Battleford, which is our hometown, we'll say, from, our communities around the Battlefords. And that was the last mass hanging in Canada at that time in the late 1800s. So I speak to that because all of these situations factor into relationships. And moving forward, when we're looking at aspects of industrial development, projects, all these types of things, we have to really gauge and look back in terms of trust. Can we trust? And you're asking leadership now in many of our communities to visit and speak to elders, youth, membership on those types of issues, and so this all carries forward. So I guess in short, the exercise really is in about building trust, and I wanted to ensure that I was able to mention that because it is a big important and it's a real life, real time issue that needs to be dealt with each and every day in each and every relationship. But focusing on, I guess, just moving forward in terms of the Impact Assessment Act and things that, we've been doing here at the center is, we will be moving forward to build and have been developing what we call a consultation tracker. And many times, as I mentioned, just how the relationships have gone, over the past century and into this century, with respect to taking our concerns, our initiatives, our wants and our needs seriously, we've been marginalized from the economy quite a bit. And so looking at this, looking at how we can assist and support our First Nations in Saskatchewan, we landed on an opportunity to ensure that we create a tool that's able to heighten the accountability for everybody involved. When industry is looking at the development of a project, how do they engage? How do we as a company meet, introduce, and educate a First Nation and their people? How do we, and as a community reciprocally, how do we track? How do we keep a handle on oftentimes the number of consultation, duty to consult trigger letters that a community receives, and how do we keep up with that? Because sometimes they get inundated. The leadership in communities get inundated with letters, and depending on which province you're in or which jurisdiction you're in, how the province and the feds at times deal with consultation changes. And so I think it's important that our First Nations themselves are supported and are able to develop, whether it's a policy, whether it's a constitution, whether it's legislation within their nations. How do they see things and their involvement? And that's one place where we look to support as the Saskatchewan First Nations Natural Resource Centre of Excellence. And so what we're embarking on is to develop a tracker where we're able to follow up and support as needed our First Nations with their consultation initiatives. And obviously it's, we respect the autonomy of each of our nations. That's extremely important. But again, as a regional support institution, our center here, we are there to support our First Nation communities, and that's what we aim to do. In terms of our initiative over the next short while, We will be engaged firsthand with the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada to deliver training programs, a level 1 and level 2 for those that are interested, and we are organizing those training sessions now, and certainly looking forward to them. And we have a lot of development here in Saskatchewan and up and coming. We have many projects that occur up north in the uranium sector with established proponents, and some that are new, and some that are learning their way in dealing with our First Nations. And also to the south, in south central Saskatchewan, if you will, around Lake Diefenbaker, there's a proposed huge project, upwards of $4 billion over the next number of years. And so we want to make sure that we're being proactive in finding opportunities to support all of our First Nations here in Saskatchewan, in reaching their goals, ensuring that they're educated, that they receive information, but reciprocally, they're able to develop their plans, their policies, and are able to respond, as they see fit. I want to take some time also to thank the First Nations Major Projects Coalition for embarking on this conference and being able to bring people together from all over Canada and speaking about the importance of participating and influencing impact assessments. It's critical that we don't only focus on environmental impacts as well. I mean, we have to be conscious of what value at times the projects mean or hold to our people, because there are economic opportunities associated with projects. And as we move forward, I think it is critical that, again, that we all take the initiative to understand what inherent rights and treaty rights mean to the Canadian collective, and approaching things from a nation-to-nation basis. And that's really what we kept in mind as we embarked on our work here. In terms of a consultation tracker, we're able to create efficiencies, we're able to help track and organize consultation, engagement activities, so that our nations, our leaders, their staff are able to concentrate on the real work, and that's ensuring that their teachings, their learnings are being able to be shared, as opposed to spending an enormous amount of time organizing. And I think an important component of that industry and government need to think about is ensuring that our First Nations have adequate capacity, and oftentimes that means funding to be able to support these activities. I think that's been the most difficult thing, is that the proper capacity is not shared or afforded to our communities in many fronts. So that's a very important thing moving forward. I think in closing, again, I want to thank all of the organizations, all of the nations that have participated in this. It's important that we do share learnings. I know we go back to our elders and our membership, our youth, our leadership in our own areas to converse, to discuss, to get guidance. But as Indian people, as First Nations people, right across Canada into the US, we all have opportunities to share our plights, our successes with each other. And I think the more and more we do that, it's extremely important that we do that. We used to travel many miles, to trade, to do ceremony, to pray with each other. And you look at it in today's times, and we look at social media, we look at the way we're meeting now in times of COVID-19, the opportunity to share and support one another, as nations and as people that are working on behalf of our people is critical. So I wanted to, end with that, to encourage each and every one of you to continue on and to pray for each other. These times, as I mentioned, are very difficult for many of our families, and they're dealing with many things. And it is important to be patient. And if I liken that same approach to what we do each and every day in participating in natural resource projects, patience is an important teaching, that we can't all learn everything in a day. It takes time, and we need to really think about that, as First Nations, as industry, and as government, to try and work together to find solutions. Sometimes we don't get our way, but that's what talking brings, to understand and compromise. So with that, thank you very much. I wish everybody a great rest of the day. And again, thank you to First Nations Major Projects Coalition and the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada for the work that you're doing to better understand and include us as First Nations people. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Sheldon, for a very compelling and articulate presentation. I want to, Sheldon's here with us and is going to be available to answer any questions that you might have. I ask again that you use the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom screen here to be able to identify the question that you would want to pose to Sheldon. So while those questions are rolling in, Sheldon, I just want to, maybe I'll start with a question or a comment. Oftentimes, when I was listening to you speak, I was hearing that it's not the environment versus the economy, it's the environment and the economy. Is that fair for me to make that statement?
Yeah, well, I guess it's yeah. I mean, as fair as we can get it. But I really always try and come from the perspective that it's such a delicate balance, right? I mean, it's whether it's from leadership or people that work in the field, or organizations that support. I mean, that's always the $1 million question: is how do we support and how do we ensure that we're able to come forward as stewards of the land, to be able to bring all of these learnings and guidance together, and ensure that we are adhering to our teachings, from our elders, our leadership, our nation members, and be able to move forward in a project that's going to be that's going to be able to bring benefits to people, but we're able to balance those benefits with potential impacts to our lands and our territories. That's always the difficult question. So in short, I guess to your comment, or question, I don't see it as a economy versus the environment. It's ensuring that we're able to come together, and as Melody had mentioned earlier too, it's very important to get the lay of the land and to do the work, as an individual, as a nation, and as collective nations, to look at identifying those methodologies that are going to work for us, and base our research, our guidance on those methodologies that have been developed. And we've come into a similar situation on the North Saskatchewan River, with regards to SAGD, oil developments and assisted developments, and really the worry of the amount of water that's utilized for one of those developments is quite enormous. And so when we're looking at the potential opportunity mitigate that, and then you consider use of our First Nations to practice their treaty, inherent in treaty or Aboriginal rights, whatever term you'd like to use, downriver, right? And we have also the Cumberland House Delta, which is an area that we're conscious of, and the impacts to it. So when we're looking at those thresholds in terms of what our needs are to ensure that our treaty rights are respected, those are certainly important areas that we need to be conscious of and articulate and focus on moving forward. So yeah, thanks for your comment, Dan. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Sheldon. I don't have any questions in the Q&A, and I just want to afford you an opportunity, upon reflection, you might want to add some more comments to us here in closing, Sheldon.
Yeah, I think I'm good. I just, I do want to, really commend everybody that is here and the good work everybody is doing. A lot of times as First Nations, we have a big responsibility, as I had spoken to, in the video, and it's important, as we move through, whether it's us that are supporting our elders, our leadership, or our nations, whether it's the federal government, the provincial government, or the proponent, we need to ensure that we're able to all be there as we're going to focus on and welcome Indigenous knowledge or traditional knowledge or First Nations knowledge into the fold. We need to ensure that we're able to take that guidance from the beginning to the, for the life cycle of the project, from the beginning to the end, not just at certain points in time. And that's, I know we all feel that responsibility, and we're trying to figure out where and how we do that. But I would encourage, more sharings like this. I want to say thanks to the agency as well, and First Nations Major Projects Coalition for bringing this together. And it's great to hear everybody and see what everybody is doing, across the country. And I think we do need more of that, so we're not reinventing the wheel. And we learn something every day. Like, we learn something every time where we're able to come on and share and think, yeah, maybe that'll work here, or can we reach out and bring each other in to speak to our leadership or elders or communities or in the video. We're always here to ensure that our inherent and treaty and Aboriginal rights, they're protected first and foremost, before we look to support or approve a project. So we want to do that as collectively as possible, with great respect. So I'll leave my comments there. And again, thank you, Dan, for the great job that you're doing. I also want to thank Angel as well. I was in the attendees area, not the speakers area, so she was flipping me over before I came on. So yeah, I do want to say thanks to everybody. And Angel did a great job, and Melody, good to see you again. You're doing great work up in your area too. So have a great afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for including me in the conference.
Thank you, Sheldon. Much appreciated.
Yeah, great job, Sheldon. And in terms of just wrapping up a pretty fulsome day here today, I just want to reflect on some of the things that I and making space for both traditional ecological knowledge and our Western science. We heard from Chief Ian Campbell about getting beyond consultation to consent. Lots of information about baselines, data, metrics, mitigation options. Sheldon underscored the import of our medicines, our sacred practices, and our spirituality. The need for us to manage expectations, but also to set the bar high, because nobody rises to low expectations. We heard about our responsibility, the great responsibility that we carry as stewards of the land, a generational responsibility, in fact. A lot of talk about collaboration, and at its core, collaboration is co-labor, shared vision, common goals, distributing leadership. blah, 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 talk about working together, but it doesn't fully materialize. And so the import of events such as this to get us to gather together and to share critical information can't be understated, because none of us are as smart as all of us. Lastly, I just want to point out comments that have been made yesterday and today that, it's all about relationships at the end of the day, relationships that are founded on trust, reciprocity, and the technical people in the background. I particularly want to acknowledge our participants and our co-sponsors. Our third day starts tomorrow morning or afternoon, depending upon what time zone that you're in. We'll start promptly at the commencement time of 12 p.m. or 9 a.m. We're going to be hearing from the Young Thunder drum group to start us off in a cultural way. And tomorrow is an opportunity for us to get into to breakout groups. There's 3 different topics that we're going to be discussing, approximately 30 minutes per topic. The first topic being impact assessment through an Indigenous lens. And the third topic is IA tools and supports. And supporting that facilitation will be Trevor Smith and Angel Ransom, both members of the First Nations Major Projects Coalition. We will have a report out from the facilitators, and then we will move towards wind down and identifying where we're going into the future. And Elder Verna McGregor will be joining us at the end of the day tomorrow to close our conference in prayer. So great day, everybody. Angel, I just want to
Thank you, Dan. Yes. Sorry, I've got these little pop-up things telling me my video started. Yes, absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for sticking it through these fantastic presentations. I'm a huge supporter of sharing knowledge and never reinventing the wheel, because I know our day-to-day lives and the things we do for our nations and where we come from is busy enough as it is. So I'm all for working together. Just in light of tomorrow for the breakout group discussions, I did send out copies of the questions and some supporting materials that'll help inform that exercise tomorrow, both in English and French. If you have not received a copy of the breakout discussion questions from me via email, we will have them displayed as well on the screen, I from what I understand, or we'll have copies regardless. But I look forward to getting down to the nitty gritty and getting down to a little bit of work tomorrow. Thank you. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
thank you very much. Thank you for your time today, everybody. And we will reconvene tomorrow, 12 p.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. on PST. Safe travels through the night. Be safe. Bye-bye.